The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Met with the Chinese president and said he, quote, his office said he, quote, raised our serious concerns about interference activities in Canada. Was the Prime Minister ever briefed about any of these, and I quote, interference activities that he says, that the Prime Minister says went on in Canada?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am regularly briefed by intelligence officials and security experts on threats to Canada and to Canadians, whether it be cyber threats, whether it be interference with Canadian diaspora communities, whether it be use of online misinformation or disinformation. There are a range of threats out there that Canadians and Canadian security agencies continue to be vigilant against. We will always be there to protect Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
What specific interference was the Prime Minister referring to when he raised his serious concerns about interference with the Chinese president?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
We've known for many years that there are consistent engagements by representatives of the Chinese government into Canadian communities with local media, reports of illicit Chinese police stations. These are all things that we continue to be concerned about, that our officials stay active on, and that we will continue to be vigilant around to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister continues to ignore the crisis that Canadian households are about to face with the skyrocketing home heating bills. They are expected to double in many communities. Some households will be stuck paying $5,000 to $6,000 a year, and yet he wants to not just maintain but triple and then triple his carbon tax on Canadians. Now, he might play a game of delaying the implementation in a few provinces, but why wouldn't he take decisive action to reverse the damage he's caused to all Canadian and all of their homes by reversing the carbon tax on home heating altogether?
Here, here. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the price on pollution returns more money to the average families across the country than it costs them. It's a way of fighting climate change and putting more money in the pockets of Canadians. That's what Canadians in Atlantic Canada and elsewhere across the country are going to be able to benefit from. As we step up in the fight against climate change, we will be putting more money back in the pockets of Canadians that need it. Conservatives continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on that. We need to continue to be there for Canadians, and we will.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Our information comes from the man that he appointed as the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and that same official calculated that 60% of Canadians will pay more in carbon tax costs than they get back in any rebates. And that is even higher in provinces where the federally imposed but provincially administered tax does not come with any rebate at all. The Prime Minister wants to go further in increasing the costs of Canadians to drive, to eat, and to heat themselves throughout the very cold winter that's just ahead. Will he show some common sense and stop attacking the people on the ground like his minister and reverse the tax?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians from coast to coast to coast, but particularly in Atlantic Canada, where they saw the devastating impact of Hurricane Fiona, know that we have to continue in stepping up in our fight against climate change. And what we are doing, what we've been doing for years, is ensuring that while we fight climate change, we support families that actually need it. That's why the carbon price actually returns more money to the average families than they pay. And that's something that was confirmed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We will continue to be there to support Canadians while we fight climate change instead of peddling disinformation like the Conservatives.
Le député de la Prairie.
Quand on questionne le Premier ministre sur l'ingérence.
When we ask about the Prime Minister about interference in the 2019 election, he blusters and compares us to Donald Trump, who's denying the result of the American presidential election. There's one person who spoke about the federal election in 2019, and it's the guy who won it. Chinese interference is very serious. To avoid it happening again, we need to know. He's got to stop posturing and tell us which candidates were funded by China, and above all, how did that happen? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the integrity of our elections were not compromised. In January 2019, we set up a nonpartisan committee to assess threats to electoral integrity, and it was clearly established that the integrity of our elections had not been compromised in 2019 or in 2021. The Director of Elections said yesterday that nothing leads him to believe that there was any interference in terms of having a free and fair election. Instead of creating false concerns for Canadians, we want to reassure everyone about the integrity of our system. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Prime Minister is hard to follow with Chinese interference. On the one hand, he doesn't think it's important enough to respond seriously to the opposition, but at the G20, he was running around after the Chinese President Xi Jinping to talk about it. Here, he doesn't know anything about it, but at the G20, he was aware enough to go and discuss it with the Chinese president. So the question is, does he know all the details about Chinese interference and is hiding it from us? Or did he approach Xi Jinping solely based on a newspaper article? Either it's not honest or it's not smart. Where's the Prime Minister standing on this? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member from the Bloc Québécois is just saying whatever he wants. We know that it's important to protect Canadians from interference that exists from different countries. We know that full well. However, at the same time, we can confirm that in every briefing that I have had, when it comes to security, our intelligence experts, and those who were monitoring our elections, we can confirm that the integrity of our elections was never called into question. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
And the Bank of Canada continued to attack high wages as a cause of inflation, when in reality, real wages have actually fallen. In fact, workers' share of GDP has also fallen. You know what hasn't fallen? The profits of large corporations. In fact, big grocery stores have seen profits increase by 118.3% since 2019. So when will this Prime Minister tackle corporate greed and protect families?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, building an economy that works for all Canadians has always been at the heart of what we've done as a government. That's why we raised taxes on the 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. It's why we introduced the Canada Child Benefit, which stopped sending child benefit checks to millionaires and instead sent more money to the families that actually need it. It's also why Budget 2022 included a temporary Canada Recovery Dividend and increases the corporate income tax rate on financial institutions permanently. We're making sure that corporations pay their fair share while we support Canadians.
Member for Burnaby South.
This Prime Minister can't even say the word profit, let alone take on the corporate greed of rich corporations. The response of the Bank of Canada so far has been to increase interest rates, and that's having a real impact on families. Families like Lauren Gilbert from BC, who shares that her monthly variable her mortgage has gone up by $1,000 a month. Many families like her are hurting. So when we know that the Bank of Canada sets the monetary policy, but the Government of Canada sets the fiscal policy. So when will this government tackle inflation so it doesn't hurt people?
Hear, hear. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, we have stepped up to support people who need it the most through the pressures that we're facing because of inflation. Whether it was doubling the GST credit for 6 months, which puts hundreds of dollars more into the pockets of 11 million households across the country, whether it's moving forward on a $500 top-up to the Canada housing benefit to make sure that low-income families can pay rent, or making sure that low-income families and middle-income families who can't afford it can send their kids to the dentist. These are direct and concrete things that are helping Canadians get through these difficult times.
Before we go on to the